Good morning. Today is May 13th, 2020, and I wanted to post a video to go over today's lesson. Before I get into the actual lesson, I wanted to mention a few announcements. The first announcement is if you speak Portuguese, I did post a flyer that was distributed by Northeast High School that has information about where your family can go if they need help getting resources of any kind. So if you need help accessing it or if you need any more information about it, please shoot me an email and I can get in contact with the person that sent me the flyer. The second thing is classwork. So there are many of you that are still not submitting classwork. And I've been in contact with some of your other content teachers, your math teachers. I sit in on their Google Classroom meets, and I'm not seeing many of you there. I'm in contact with many of you almost daily on WhatsApp or Class Remind or Google Voice Chat. And you're telling me that you have computers, that you have access to internet, that you don't have any questions. So if that's the case, I really need you to try to start getting some of this work submitted. I wouldn't recommend going back to the beginning and starting from May 4th and trying to get every single assignment done. That can definitely overwhelm you. However, I would suggest starting this week or even just starting today and starting to get some of this work submitted. I'd hate to see you fall so far behind that you feel like you can't catch up. So we only have about 3.5 weeks left. I know that some of this can be overwhelming, but you have a lot of resources, a lot of people that you can reach out to if you need help. Your teachers don't know that you need help unless you tell them, though. So if you need help and that's why you're not submitting work, but you're not reaching out to anyone, it just looks like you're not submitting your work. So please start reaching out to me if you need help, or otherwise, please just start trying to get some of that work submitted. So without further ado, I'm going to start going over the lesson. So when you go to your assignment page, this is what it looks like. And you'll notice that I did also add the 2 videos that are featured in the slides. You can access them there, or you can just wait, and there is a link within the slides. So since you can't edit while you're in present mode, but I always have such a hard time seeing the slides, I wanted to share that if you click this arrow and it stays there. So if you want to get it back when you're finished, you can put it right back. But if you hit that arrow, it will make it a little bit bigger and a little bit easier to see. And I also have my start bar. I'm not really sure the technical term for this. Sorry, Miss Poinsett, but I do have that auto hidden as well, which helps, I think, to make you see the slides a little bit clearer. So this week we've been learning about what makes us unique. We've been learning about heredity, cells, genes, chromosomes, and inherited traits. So all of that stuff within our bodies that kind of make us who we are. So the name of the unit for this week is what makes a family: cells, genes, chromosomes, and traits. And today's specific focus, which is right here, is we will focus on the verb to have, acquired and inherited traits, and dominant and recessive genes. As always, we have the second and the third slide devoted to instructions. So you can either click in a language that you need, or you can take this and you can copy it and paste it right into Google Translate if you need to. But I'm going to be going through each slide. So slide 4 is all about the verb to have. And I know for a fact that we went over this in class. I know for a fact that you have this in your notebook. Unfortunately, your notebooks are at school in class, but regardless, you should be at least a little bit familiar with this. So to have is the second most common verb in the English language. And this verb is going to show up a lot in today's text. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to watch the video. I'm not going to play it in this presentation because the audio, when you play while screencastifying, it makes it really hard to hear. So you can watch that on your own. But over here, I did want to look at the chart that they gave you. So we learned about pronouns. Pronouns take the place of nouns. So the present tense is in this column. The past tense of the verb have is in this column. This last column is something called conditional present, which is a tense that we hadn't gotten to yet before school let out. But it basically tells you something that might have happened in the past should you have known something. I know that's sort of confusing, but we'll talk a little bit more about it. But looking at the chart, you'll notice that all of the pronouns, I, you, we, they, or not all, but 4 out of 5 of the pronouns have the same present, past, and conditional present tense of the verb. So I have, I had, I would have, you had, you would have, we had, we would have, they have, they had, they would have. The only pronoun that presents a different form of the verb is he, she, it. So anytime that you are talking about one specific person or one specific object, you would use has for present. The past tense does not change. So for example, I have a cat that is meowing loudly in the background. I'm sure you will hear her throughout this video. However, if I were talking about my sister, I would say, my sister, she has a cat. And there she is. So the only pronoun that has a different tense of the verb to have is he, she, it. All the other ones are exactly the same. It's always have or had or would have. So let's put that into practice. So read the example from the text, change the verb to the correct conjugation to have. And I like that this slide, they gave you the subject. So the subject here is genes. The subject is who the sentence or what the sentence is about. So normally a sentence setup goes subject, verb, object. So the subject of this sentence is genes, and the pronoun that would replace that subject is they. So whether you need to look back at the previous slide or whether you remember, you want to type in the correct form of the verb that you would use here. And you would do the same thing for all 3 of these. So genes have traits. They have traits. And they do give you the subject over here. So I would try to maybe fill them in without using the chart and then go back and check them. Okay, I used have or had here, and the subject was it. Let me go back and check and make sure that I used the correct tense, or excuse me, the correct form of the tense. This slide is going to focus on slide 7 and slide 8 only. And this slide has been in every lesson that I have posted so far. This is a prediction, so sort of like a do now. So what it wants you to do is it wants you to look at the subheadings, it wants you to look at the images, and it wants you to look at the information. So looking first, just looking it over, we're not going to read it yet. We're just previewing it. The first thing it wants us to look at is the subheadings. The heading is what makes a family what makes a family: cells, genes, chromosomes, and traits. Inherited traits, ancestors, and acquired traits. Those are subheadings. So that's the first thing it wants you to look at. Then it wants you to look at the images. So I see eyes, all different eye colors. I see all different hair colors. I see what looks maybe like a family tree. Here I see people doing things together, like reading and riding a bike. And then finally, it wants you to look at the information. Now, you don't have to, for this part, you don't have to read the information word for word. Instead, look for words that you recognize that jump out at you, and also look at those bolded words. So we talked in class about how a bolded word tells you that it is important, whether it's because it's a vocabulary word or because it's a word that the author, for some reason, wanted you to focus on. So look at bolded words and look for words that jump out at you. So eye color, red, brown, black, hair color. These are things that might jump out at you. And then what you will do is you will fill out the green boxes. So looking at the subheadings, what will you learn? They gave you the subheadings here: ancestor, inherited traits, acquired traits. And I filled this one out already. I will learn ancestors and what they are. Because when I was talking in the Google Meet yesterday with some of the other students, a lot of them hadn't heard the word ancestors before. So I think that that's a good takeaway for what I would like to learn from this today, and we'll go over it. Then look at the images, which we already did. What do you think you will learn? And it might help for you to say about. Based on what's in the images, what are you going to learn about? And then looking at the information, we said like eye color, hair color. We talked about the bolded words, like inherited information. So I will learn about what? What is your guess for what you will learn about? And then once you're finished with that slide, we can actually go through and we can read the text. As I mentioned, the title of this slide is What Makes a Family? Cells, Genes, Chromosomes, and Traits. Genes have information. The information makes our traits. Some traits are inherited. The traits are from our ancestors. Parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, and more are ancestors. We are the offspring of our children or our parents. So kind of recapping what we just read, we learned yesterday that our body is made up of cells and that within cells we have genes. And genes have information about our DNA. And that information makes up our traits or our DNA. Some of those traits are inherited from our ancestors. Ancestors are people in your family that came before you. So if this is you, you're the offspring. This is your parents. This is your parents' parents. And then your parents' parents' parents. So those are your ancestors. So some things, some traits you get or you inherit from your ancestors. So some examples of inherited traits are eye color, hair color, eyesight. So if you need glasses, some things, and then some other things that are inherited traits are skin color, height, foot size, and birthmarks. So all of those traits or all of these traits that are listed on this slide are inherited, meaning that somewhere along the line, someone in your family had brown eyes or red hair, if it's not your immediate family, your immediate parents. Then we have acquired traits. Not all traits are inherited. Other traits are acquired. You learn acquired traits. You practice. You learn how to ride a bike. You learn how to read. You learn how to play sports. You learn how to play music. So acquired traits are all of those traits that you learn as you're growing up. And you can kind of remember that because when we say that someone is learning a second language, we call it second language acquisition. We say that you are acquiring or learning a second language. So acquired traits are traits that we learn. So then based on the information that we just read, we want to fill out this chart. So this one is done for us. It says, who are our ancestors? And we already said that our ancestors are our parents, grandparents, and more. Who gives us our hair and eye color? Our ancestors. Because we said that those traits are inherited. Okay, where? Where are the traits from? Traits are from our ancestors. Where do we learn acquired traits? So acquired traits, that was on slide 8. It said you practice, you learn how to read a bike, you learn how to read, you learn how to play sports. So how do we learn acquired traits? You might say interacting with other people or going to school. For what? What type of information do genes have? That should say do genes have, not two genes. What type of information do genes have? Genes have information that makes our traits. What are inherited traits? And then you'll go back to, I think that is on slide 7. And these are inherited traits. And then finally, what? What are offspring? Offspring are the children of parents. So you are the offspring of your mom and dad. And then the last question, what are acquired traits? So you'll go to this slide and you'll tell me what an acquired trait is. And I can tell you that an acquired trait is a trait you learn. So your hair color is an inherited trait, not an eye color. But learning to read is not inherited. You're not born with the knowledge to learn how to read. You have to acquire it. Next slide, we talk about dominant and recessive genes. So there is a video here that describes it very nicely that you can watch on your own. And then what you're going to do is you're just going to complete the green space. So they do mention this word allele, and I have the definition pulled up here. It's one of two or more I'm having trouble reading today. One or two or more alternative forms of a gene that arise by mutation and are found at the same place on a chromosome, which I know that's a very difficult definition, but pronunciation. Allele is how we pronounce it. So what then it wants you to do is it wants you to go through. So all of these are dominant traits. Do you have dominant traits? So do you have a widow's peak? If you're not sure what a widow's peak is, you might want to go to Google Images and you might want to look up a widow's peak. So a widow's peak is kind of like when you have that little lip at the top of your hair. If you can kind of see how, and even she has it a little bit. So if you have that, you have a dominant trait. Facial dimples, so those circles when you smile. Does your hair have a cowlick in the back? So does it kind of spin in the back? A cleft chin is a hole, not a real hole, but like a dimple in your chin. I have one of those. A straight thumb or a curved thumb. Freckles, short fingers, or a Roman or larger nose. So if you have it, you can just put like an X or a check mark, whatever you want to put there. Then we're going to look at another text. This other text is on slide 12 and slide 13. And this has to do with dominant and recessive genes. So before we actually read it, we want to look it over. We want to look at the subheadings, the images, and the information. So the subheadings are dominant gene, recessive gene, eye color. And also dominant recessive gene. So the subheadings seem to be dominant gene, recessive gene, and eye color. Then you want to look at the images. So on this slide, I see a picture of a cell, I see DNA, and then I see eye color. So something about DNA must have to do with eye color. And then on this slide, you actually have pictures of all of those, not all of them, but a lot of the examples that were mentioned on this slide. So you have a cleft chin, so you see the dimple like Superman. Widow's peak, dimples, brown or black hair. So it's telling you what the dominant gene is versus what the recessive gene is. And what that means is if you have this gene, it will show up in your offspring versus a recessive gene, it might not necessarily show up. That's why brown eyes are more common than any other color because it's a dominant gene. This one is interesting. This being able to cross your right thumb over your left thumb or your left thumb over your right thumb. I didn't know that some people couldn't do it. So apparently I can, unless I'm doing it incorrectly. I'm not sure. Okay, so then what you'll do is you'll take a few minutes to kind of take a guess of what you think you're going to learn about. So looking at those subheadings, what will you learn about? I will learn about. Look at the images. What will you learn about? A lot of pictures of eye color, a lot of pictures of different traits, and then looking at the information. So look at words that jump out at you. DNA, cell, eye color, gene, dominant, recessive. So what do you think that you will learn about? And then we can actually go in and read the text. So a dominant gene has one strand of DNA that is stronger than the other strand of DNA. And obviously, if something is stronger, it's going to be dominant. It's going to be more powerful. A recessive gene is one strand of DNA that is weaker than the other strand of DNA. So when we look at eye color, we have both a dominant and a recessive gene for eye color. So, why does a mother and a father with brown eyes have a child with blue eyes? Well, that's because brown is dominant and blue is recessive. So, and this is I forget what these are called, but I know that you were learning about these Punnett Square. I know that you were learning about these in science with Miss Knight and your other science teacher. So, this kind of explains why when a dominant and a recessive gene come together, why you get the result that you get. Then we have dominant genes and recessive genes. So a cleft chin is the dominant gene. A recessive gene would be no cleft. The same thing with widow's peak. A widow's peak is the dominant gene. No widow's peak is the recessive gene. Dimples, brown and black hair is dominant while blonde is recessive. Freckles, brown eyes, we said are dominant. Recessive are gray or blue. And then finally, a free earlobe or an attached earlobe. So pull on your ear, and if you can pull it away, it's not attached, it's free. If you cannot, it is. I have an attached earlobe, so. And then the same thing here. So you'll just answer the questions using the two previous slides. So, and for this, you have a green for all of them. So which strand of DNA is stronger, the dominant gene or the recessive gene? Which strand of DNA is weaker, the dominant gene or the recessive gene? So we said that the stronger is the dominant and that the weaker is the recessive. What is an example of a dominant gene? So for here, you want to look back and you want to look for an example of a dominant gene. Pick any of these. And then you want to find an example of a recessive gene. You can pick any of these. What about you? Two dominant genes that I have are, so look here, and two of these that you have. So two dominant genes that I have are brown hair and I can cross my right thumb over my left thumb. Two recessive genes I have are an attached earlobe and no dimples. So you'll pick two for you. And then looking at slide 12, it's asking you this question again. Why does a mother and a father with brown eyes have a child with blue eyes? So you can kind of go ahead and do your best at answering that. This is a summary slide. So what I did do is I went through this week and I added exactly what slide to look at to fill it out. So genes can be dominant or recessive. Dominant genes are, go to slide 12. This is what dominant genes are. And you can copy it, I believe, because it's not an image, or you can type it in. So a dominant gene has one strand of DNA that is stronger than the other. Do the same thing for recessive. I have dominant genes. You're going to look at slide 14 and you're going to look right here. What are the two dominant genes that you chose? And then I also have recessive genes. What are the recessive genes? So you'll go to slide 14. What are the two recessive genes that you listed? We're almost finished here. The last thing that you're going to do is you're going to watch a video on alleles. And this is an optional slide, so you do not have to complete it if you do not want to, but it is quite interesting. So if you'd like to, all that you have to do is play the video, and then the video will play right here.
Welcome to.
So you can just have this open and typing as you're watching the video, which is nice. That wraps it up for today. I don't know why it says day 2. We're actually on day 3. Today is the 13th, right? Okay, that would have been bad. So we're finished with today's classwork. If you have any more questions, you can let me know. We can schedule a Google Meet for later today if you would like. I do have a meeting coming up at noon, and I do have another meeting at 1. So I would be available to meet with people individually at 2 p.m. In the meantime, I'm going to continue calling home, letting your parents know what work you're completing, what work you're not completing. And I hope that you, after you get your schoolwork done, are able to go outside and enjoy the beautiful day. I miss you all. Take care.